You're listening to Neuma, the Crossroad of Science and Enlightenment. This podcast is a place where science meets soul and healing meets hope, where the latest in science meets ancient wisdom to illuminate the path toward healing and transformation. We break through stigma and misinformation to explore the transformative power of psychedelic therapy, holistic health, and the mind-body connection. Through stories, insight, and expert conversations, we provide practical solutions to help you reclaim your mental health, embrace your spirituality, and achieve true enlightenment. Hosted by Alan Wiederhold, author of the book Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics. Alan is the consummate explorer, passionate about empowering others to embrace the divinity of their true selves, as well as the founder of Neuma Health, whose mission is to restore and transform lives. Here's your host, Alan Wiederhold.
Hey everybody, this is Alan Wiederhold, the CEO of Neuma and the host of the Neuma podcast. So this conversation, Jill, that we're going to have today is actually, it's kind of fitting because it's election day. It was my birthday yesterday, so I've been really excited about this conversation because we're going to talk about one of my favorite conversations, MDMA. And I think that's, again, it's really fitting for today because of election day. I think
New start. Yeah.
So we've heard so much in the last, I feel like 8 months about this and trials, clinical trials, and all of this stuff. And I was talking to someone a couple of days ago, and they had the same hangups that I did. Like a year and a half ago, I was struggling with depression. I was struggling to make sense of what my life was, which is kind of ironic when you're 55. And
no, it's a thing.
It's a thing. So it is a thing. So glad I'm not the outlier.
Yeah.
But he was dealing with the same things. He was dealing with the same questions. So I think this is absolutely perfect. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I come to MDMA from a PTSD patient point of view. So happy to kind of share my experience. And I had the very same initial absolutely not. I don't do that kind of stuff when I was first introduced to this. So have to dive in and help
me about that. So, because we were kind of joking about that in the very beginning. How did you get here?
I fell into this therapy very short, very concise. In my late 40s, I wound up having a massive panic attack, a PTSD panic attack that basically came from childhood trauma that I hadn't dealt with my entire life. My long-term partner of over 20 years, Carl, had passed away about a year and a half after his passing. When the widow's fog kind of started to dissipate, all of a sudden this unresolved trauma and fear from a physically and mentally abused and neglected child kind of came to the surface. And without that loving relationship to kind of calm my nervous system down, it came about in a massive panic attack that just would not go away. And again, long story short, my therapist who had helped me with the grief diagnosed me with the PTSD. I argued. I'm like, I'm corporate girl. Have you met me? I had PTSD. And she was in a training program to become a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist and said to me, go take a look at the MAPS, MAPS.org, the MAPS clinical trials. At the time they were on phase 2. They had published phase 2 trial results. And I was that person initially who said no. My brain was the only thing that had gotten me away from my parents, gotten me a stable adulthood. And I was a child of the 80s, egg in the frying pan. I wasn't going to do it. It came down to, you remember the egg in the frying pan? Everybody remembers the egg in the frying pan.
I see the frying pan. I see all the Dare police cars and Nancy Reagan saying, just say no.
Say no. Well, I had listened. And ultimately, it came down to my Wellbutrin prescription and the talk therapy were not making a dent. I was getting worse. There was actual clinical trials, information, and I was with my trusted therapist and we were also going to be working with her mentor in the program, who at the time was a medical doctor. And in my world, that just kind of lined up, and I took a leap of faith. 3 journeys later, a year later, I no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. So yeah, that's how I got here.
Wow. So I've heard, and I was tracking the whole MAPS clinical trial this year, and that was a lot of the things they were saying is like 71% of people no longer had depressive or PTSD symptoms.
Right.
Like, tell me about that. Like,
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right.
What does that even mean?
So I think it's really important to understand that trauma underlies PTSD. And I think technically I probably could have gotten diagnosed with complex PTSD, but that wasn't necessarily kind of out there in my late 40s. And so PTSD for me, where I fell on the scale, I was suicidal. I was hypervigilant. I was 1,000% sure I didn't have a future. And you can only say to your therapist so many times, one more thing and I'm done. I'm out. I'm calling it quits, that she gets the message. And so for me, and I'm putting my hands on my shoulders for people who just might be listening. I think my shoulders were at my ears my entire life. Just a constant, I'm on guard because there's a threat, hypervigilance. At the end of those 3 sessions, and it was a full year. I started in September. The integration from the last session, the last session was May, I would say by September, so a full year. I was no longer suicidal. I knew I had a future. I knew that the feelings of fear were crafted by a toddler getting beaten by her father. And so I still had trauma to heal. I've still continued my talk therapy. I've actually worked with other medicines to understand how they work with trauma. I had 19 years of abuse and neglect to deal with. So I'm always very, very careful with people when I explain, these 3 sessions didn't clear up everything in my life.
That's what I was going to ask, because like I hear there's a tendency let's face it, a lot of us who have had these awakenings, as I like to call them, we're like, oh my gosh, but there's actual still work that has to be done. This
Depending
isn't like a one and done.
You come in with, absolutely. And a childhood of abuse, that's going to take some time to unravel. I mean, I'm in my mid-50s. I still maintain my relationship with my therapist. It's shocking how stuff still comes up. So I'm always very, very careful with folks. Maybe the therapy healed the capital T traumas, no longer suicidal, no longer clinically on that PTSD scale. And I continue to do work.
See, and I love that because I talk about that with myself. So did you know that you had like all this trauma growing up, or did you block it out?
No, I just knew I had a crappy childhood, and I blamed myself for not being smart enough or good enough to get over my parents' stuff.
Isn't that crazy? So I kind of share that story myself. So I was sexually abused when I was little, and it's very similar. Corporate, built the dream life, kept moving the goalpost, and yet I would lay in bed and I was like, all right, I'm done. Like, I think I'm done. I'm good. Like, I'm ready to go. Like, I'm ready just to end it.
Yep. And it's too much.
I couldn't figure out like why. And I remember like having a conversation with my wife of I think it was like 23 years at the time. She was like, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. You're just not any fun. Like you've lost the will to live. And how do you love someone like that? She's like, I will always be here. Like I will never go anywhere, but you need to figure it out.
Ooh.
And we started this journal, and it was so cool because I started this like, what's going on with me? Like starting to ask the questions. And then we did this journal. And one of the questions was, what's the biggest secret you've never told? And it just came out. Like I was sexually abused for 2 years from the time I was 5 to 7. And as I did, it was like, wait a minute. I never told anybody that story. And she looks at me and she's like, I've never heard that story. And it's like,
that's big.
But I'm good. Like I'm totally fine.
It happened.
I'm going to figure it all out. Yeah. So, but I didn't know most of my life.
We weren't taught. I mean, I think we're kind of similar.
Yeah, I'm 55 yesterday.
I'm 54. We were not taught about trauma. We were not taught that it lives in our bodies. We were not taught that most of our outlook on life is developed from our outlook as a toddler. And I think the window closes around 7 or 8. So our perception of the world is developed at that point. And if you think about it, do you trust kids and their perceptions? And yet Most of us are operating from a kid perspective. And if bad things happen to us, clearly I was
I never
beaten.
even thought about that.
Yeah.
So if we're all, wow,
We're
so you
all,
blew my
as
mind.
soon as you see it, and then you see adult behavior that you're like, that's a little weird. And then you can look at them and go, oh my gosh, that's a 3-year-old acting out.
That just blew my mind. Yes, because I mean, neurologically speaking, we stop development at 9. So the average person hears no. How many times we have 35 to 70,000 negative thoughts a day.
Oof.
Yeah, that's like the number. And they begin as early as 5 and they stop right around the age of 9. And that is pretty much how we develop the rest of our thought process. Like, I've never known that, but I mean, I've always known that, but I've never equated it to that.
Yeah, think about the foundation that my house, the Jill Sitnick house, the foundation was built on her being physically and verbally abused.
Huh.
So that's a pretty shaky foundation. And then you look at the choices that I've made in my adult life, all focused on safety and security.
Wow.
Completely makes sense because my foundation was shaky.
Completely makes sense. Because then if you add in, let's just say the toxic Christianity thing, because like with being the same age, we're like totally we're in the same zone here. So I grew up in my mom and dad were awesome. Like they've been married for 56 years.
Wow.
But I never even considered their own things. So the way they raised us was not intentional. Again, it was their own, oh my God, like their own house. Like this is so crazy. But yeah, like we left the Catholic Church. We joined this charismatic Pentecostal speaking in tongues, jumping pew kind of Christian thing, and everything was a sin.
Huh.
And then you have that on top of all of that, and it's
embedded in you as a kid. Oof. Yeah. So
tell me about this clinical trial. So you and your therapist are talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
I've never even saw. So I am so broken, Jill. I never even wanted to see a therapist. Like I couldn't tell.
Oh, me neither. Yeah.
I couldn't tell anybody. Like I was like, I'll deal with it. Like I'm a man. I'll suck it up. I'm so glad that you had a therapist though. So like walk me through that process.
Yes. Well, I will actually agree with you. I thought therapy and therapeutic drugs were hokum, primarily because my mother was diagnosed clinically depressed her entire life, was on a myriad of different chemicals, and also self-medicated with cannabis. And she was suicidal her entire life. She attempted suicide 2 years before she actually passed away of COPD. So in my mind, looking at my mother, I didn't have any trust in the mental health industry at all, to be candid. I only went to therapy because, so when you have a partner pass or you have a loved one that is so close to you pass, your grief, and in our Western society, I don't think we understand grief. I don't think we talk about it enough. My grief was so overwhelming and so new that I needed, quite frankly, to treat myself, to pay for someone to be an empathetic, look, I'm starting to tear up, to be an empathetic witness to that grief and to work through it, because friends can only really do so much. And that's really how I met my therapist. It was primarily because of the grief work. And I just say, thank goodness. I mean, that's why I landed in this therapy, because she just happened. I never knew about any of this other work she was doing. She always let me pick up and put down therapy. And so when she got the call from me, like, hey, something's going on. I don't know what's going on. And like, we had been down the grief path. Suddenly we started going this other path. I start telling her stories of like my mother in the shotgun, my father like throwing me out in the thunderstorm, my father beating me, the food like I start telling her stuff. To me, that's just my life, but I hadn't told anybody in 30 years. And I start seeing her eyebrows going up. And it was like, yeah. So for me, the privilege of this therapy landing in my lap And the fact that it worked so well for me, I'm one of those 3/4 of the people.
Oh my gosh, I love
That's
it.
why we're chatting.
So I'm as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, wow, that wouldn't be very fun at parties to talk about with your friends. So, and all of us like have some version of, we just don't tell anybody. Kind of like what we were talking about before. Like you're at a party and everything is great, like, totally good. So I think there's this misnomer, just like you said, of therapy. Like we immediately think, oh my gosh, like we can't talk about mental health, we can't talk about therapy. I think it's getting a little bit better, but
the younger generations are way more accepting than our generation, in my opinion.
I remember going to an employer, because I used to be in employee benefits, and he had a lot of really young people, and he would run around with his American Express Plum card because his current benefits weren't that great.
Oh.
And he would tell these kids, if they needed therapy, here's my card, go get it. And then he was like going to talk to the families as kind of a mediator. I'm like, you don't want to really do that. So, because you don't want to get yourself in the middle of that. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, none of us like talk about therapy or going to therapy. And when we do, it's like almost like they're, I'm not going to say ill-equipped, but it's just like, as you were saying, I'm just going to throw you on some meds and we'll do some talk therapy. I was talking to a friend of mine. His father just passed away. And he's been with the same therapist for 20 years. And he's like, all I got over the last 20 years is prescription drugs and coping skills. And none of them are working. Just like, your heart just breaks.
I use the analogy because people have said to me, you know, you were on Wellbutrin and you were going through talk therapy. Why didn't you just stick it out longer? And I cannot emphasize enough how suicidal I was really creeping up the suicidal mountain, which I also think is a little hereditary, to be honest with you. I mean, my mother, it was like her thing, but I just lost my train of thought. The drugs, the
it's almost, as you're thinking about it, it's almost foundational though, because if you're seeing your mom, or you're seeing your mother doing this and these coping things, it's part of your foundation.
Oh,
So.
I know what it was that people have said to me. Why didn't you just stay there? After have gone through this therapy, here's the analogy I use. Talk therapy is the horse and buggy on the country road. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy very often is the zippy sports car on the highway. So you might
help me understand that. How do I understand?
It's just a lot faster. Like you can be in a talk therapy relationship for 10 years and maybe start to establish enough, and I'm talking from a child abuse perspective, maybe establish enough trust with a therapist to start to dig into some of that stuff. But it's hard from a conscious mind. Your conscious mind is going to slow it down. You're only dealing like an hour every week or 2 weeks normally, you know, depending on your cycle for therapy. Whereas a psychedelic goes right to the subconscious. It is, depending on the psychedelic you're using, with maybe the exception of ketamine, it's a several hour process. And then the neuroplasticity, the ability for your brain neurons to make changes to impact your behavior, you have this nice neuroplasticity window after you've worked therapeutically with a psychedelic, also recreationally, but most people don't use that window of neuroplasticity recreationally. So I kind of focus therapeutically. And so things are able to speed up. The behavior changes that you want, the thinking patterns that you want to change. It's the zippy highway compared to the horse-drawn buggy on the country road. So you have a choice. You can do either one. One of the things I remember talking to somebody who was going through a really tough time, she was at a retreat with me, and I said, you know, you're walking through hell right now. Psychedelics in this environment, because we had a lot of facilitators, we had a lot of support, you'll go through it faster.
Because I hear that a lot too. I'm on a lot of Facebook groups. We're both pretty involved on LinkedIn in the space. And that's typically a lot of what I've heard is bad trips. I hear that there's so much going on in my head that I'm afraid because it's going to be really scary. Or I've had a trip back in college. I always hear that one a lot. For whatever reason, everyone has the college thing. It's like I had a really bad trip in college.
Yep. Because it wasn't safe. They probably did it with,
yeah. So walk me, like, what's your thought process on that? Because I think we're in, it wasn't safe. What do you mean by that?
With psychedelics, set and setting, you know this. Set and setting, super important. Your mindset going in and the setting where you are. So I just actually worked this very same thing just happened to me with somebody I facilitated with. This person had a very negative LSD experience in college. She was with people she didn't particularly care for. There was lots of things going on. She also didn't have a great childhood. So she remembers that LSD experience and she hadn't done anything since. And so now we're coming in with an MDMA journey to deal with some modern issues. And she was, rightly so, a little scared. And so we spent a lot of preparation time talking about her safety with me, where this was going to happen, who our backup people were going to be, what was going to happen if Wow. And then, of course, I mean, anybody who's actually used MDMA in a therapeutic session knows that it's like a nice warm blanket on a cold day. It's nothing like LSD. But of course, she doesn't know that. So it's really important to have all of that preparatory time. I said yes to the therapy in March. My first journey wasn't until September.
Oh, wow. So
that's how much time me and my doctors took. So the way that you, and I don't want to say avoid bad trips, the way you avoid therapeutic journeys not being as therapeutic as they can be, spend the time, do the prep, get to know who you're working with, get to know what your issues are, know where the place is going to be, know who your plan B is, who you're going to call if there's a problem. Ask all of the questions that you would ask for any other medical procedure. Make sure you're screened. I was screened. I don't have any history of schizophrenia. My only diagnosis was PTSD. I don't have any heart issues. You know, if you treat it like a medical procedure that it is, the likelihood of you having a bad journey because of the circumstances. Can you have a difficult journey because you're thinking of some really hard things from your childhood? Absolutely. I just had a really challenging journey. I had some really hard feelings when my mother shot herself. But that's not the psychedelics' fault. That's the trauma's fault. And I worked through it. So really prepare, treat it as the medical procedure that it is, and you'll have much more of a therapeutic result, in my opinion.
I love that because I'm thinking of just a couple of people I know who've gone through regular therapy. So I used to have this expression, it doesn't matter where you are because you're still there. So the challenge, I think, with therapy in itself, and again, not a disrespect because I think it's amazing. Just like you said, though, it's an hour a week. Your ego is still there. So you're still not doing anything to reduce the default mode network. You're not.
Those protections are still there.
So you're still there. So it's geography at that point. So you can do all of this stuff, but you're still there. So, and I think that's kind of going back to and as you were saying, the country road and the highway, it was reminding me of when the internet was new. And we had the old modem networks when it was like,
watch out. Now we're showing our age.
Yeah, and you can go like make a sandwich and shower and do all this stuff. And then you might be on.
And then you might be online.
When we were in college, yes. And then the new superhighway, yeah. So I was thinking about it like that because that's really what psychedelics do, is they reduce and they not eliminate the default mode network, but they do it in a way to where you can review and view trauma and not have to relive it. So I said to my friend, because I don't like the word bad. I feel like bad and good. Those are narratives that come from someone else's definition of bad and good. So
right.
Challenging. I love that you said challenging. So yeah. So I always say the same thing. There are going to be uncomfortable things that you're going to see. Now, whether you choose to confront those or not, that's completely up to you.
Right.
And then, as my friend Matt Zeman always says, approach it with natural curiosity. And I love, because we were talking about this one day, and he said that if you see a dragon, for example, and you approach the dragon, look at the dragon's nose, and then climb into the dragon's nose and look out at the world from the dragon's nose from that perspective instead of, oh my God, there's a dragon, and make that negative. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that eliminates so much because you're able to, like I said, not necessarily relive trauma, but revisit it from a different perspective.
And therefore reframe it and take the emotion from it. I had someone say, well, your past still happened to you. Your father still beat you. And I said, yes, those memories are still there. And I'm going to use the conjunction but, and I'm going to say but very importantly. But those memories no longer hold the initial emotions that it was somehow my fault, that I wasn't a good enough kid, I wasn't a good enough person, I wasn't lovable enough. And that's why the behavior was happening. The reframe that MDMA allowed me to do was, and it's almost like I could watch the memory on a movie screen. Like I was literally looking at the memory kind of like some distance and looking at it at the time, again, late 40s, looking at like a 230-pound, 6'2" man beating a toddler. He was the jerk. Yeah. And I can laugh about it now because the work I've done has allowed me to take that emotion completely out of that situation. Yeah. And that's the healing. That's literally how the healing happened. And that's why it takes a while, because in some ways it's almost memory by memory.
That's what's so fascinating about this space, I think, for me. And I share this, I feel like, all the time. And I, ironically, when I came home, I wrote a book called Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics. And it's my entire story. And I relived my abuse my first time, very similar to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I was sitting on the couch of my grandparents' home, and I felt the tap on my shoulder, and I kept saying, I don't want to go. And I actually record my sessions myself so I can hear it. And
so do I. Always voice record your sessions.
Always record your sessions. So I would like say, no, please don't make me go. And then I would be in the room. And I was in the room 3 times. And actually what was fascinating though, Jill, was the third time he was actually sitting on the bed crying and telling me that it was done to him. And I was no longer a victim, but I was the one that was forgiving him and telling him he needed to go forward. So I relive all these imprints that I talk about in my book. But then I go home, and a couple of weeks later, like I'm driving down the road and I hear this voice, like just as loud as day, you know what you need to do. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, you need to find him and forgive him. Like, that is not happening.
Like, you needed to find him in real time?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I did.
Ooh.
I called him.
Okay.
48 years, and I forgave him. And he told me that it was done to him.
And
he died last weekend. My mom called me because it was a family member. And it was like 2 weeks ago. And she said, hey, I just wanted you to know, passed away from cancer. And I hadn't like thought about that in a year. And I was like, that was a hard day. And then I started to analyze the frame. Was it the emotions that I was feeling? What was the feeling? Where were the feelings? What were they? Mm-hmm. And what I realized is I was sad because I didn't know if he was able to close the loop with his abuser. I was fine because it's not happening to me anymore. I'm free of it. I got to say, I forgive you.
You closed the loop.
I closed, but I was kind of sad whether he got to, because I don't know anything about him. I didn't know if he had family. I didn't know if he was married. I didn't ask. I said, I don't want anything from you. I just want you to know.
Yeah.
I have no hold. You have no hold on me anymore. That I am going to be good. And ever since then, so yeah, it was like a whole day of reflection of, did he get to close the loop with his abuser? And if not,
with his abuse, I would be surprised. I'd be shocked.
Yeah. So it was kind of a really interesting, because like that was like the day, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm actually really good." Like, but I'm sad for him. Thanks for listening to this episode of Neuma, the Crossroad of Science and Enlightenment. We hope you're enjoying the deep dive into psychedelics, neuroplasticity, and the path to transformation. Before we continue, let's discuss recovery. After powerful experiences, your mind deserves more than just rest. it needs real support. That's where Neuma Hydrate comes in. Formulated with GABA, taurine, inositol, magnesium, and more, Neuma Hydrate is designed to help your brain recover faster and support neuroplasticity, giving you the clarity and the energy to fully embrace your journey. Fuel your recovery and elevate your mind with Neuma Hydrate. Check out neuma.health to learn more. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
It's interesting. I had my last journey. So I'm in Third Wave's psychedelic coaching program, and they just had their intensive in Costa Rica. And I was very surprised the amount of work that my nervous system was ready to do. In the second journey, there were 2 journeys in the intensive, in psilocybin. And the second journey for me wound up being all about need. And I was like, need? Well, like Jill's not allowed to have needs. And it brought me all the way back to when my mother had shot herself. I suddenly went to go live with relatives, very specifically my grandmother on my father's side.
Okay.
I did no crying. There was no hugging. I can't remember ever being comforted. And that would be a prime memory. And in the journey, I'm actually kind of reliving some of those experiences when I was 5, where I was kind of learning I'm not allowed to have needs because there's not going to be anybody to deal with those needs. And suddenly I said, oh my gosh, if she couldn't even find it to hug and comfort a little girl whose mother just shot herself, can you imagine how my father grew up? Mm-hmm. And in the journey, I think I sat up because it gave me a whole other perspective as to, I don't know how my father grew up, but I now am 100% sure there was a real lack of warmth and comfort. And that's how, when you're doing a lot of work and you're open to, and you're curious, you can get insight that you would never think of. I mean,
I was going to ask that. Do you think that most of us ever really think about our parents and what they've gone through?
Well, I don't know about you. My parents never talked about their childhood, which is a massive red flag.
Same. So my dad was a Navy as well. I spent 12 years. My dad was in Vietnam. Never talked about it. Never heard the story. Never. I don't think I have one story. All I know is I was named after 2 guys that were his shipmates in Vietnam. All I know.
That's telling. And we didn't know that those were red flags. And people who have had great childhoods and know everything about, they're like, what are you talking about? I don't have pictures.
I don't get those people. They're all liars. No, I'm just kidding. They're all so close in their families. And I'm just like, what that's like, I don't get it. Like,
it's literally like 2 different camps. We have a hard time understanding each other.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, I had a psilocybin as my second as well. So I had 3.5 hours MDMA. It was incredible. Like, oh my gosh. Like, and then I had this piece for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And then like what you're kind of describing with the whole PTSD thing. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, I've been at war with myself my whole life. Like, so what do? You go on another journey. So I needed to figure some stuff out, and I did it myself. I didn't have a sitter. I didn't have an angel. I kind of walked through my whole preparation that I created for myself.
Yep.
In my first, it was crazy because I saw these bags of all of my emotions in my baggage, and I actually left them on a row where I found my heart. And I literally say, there's my heart. I haven't seen you in such a long time. And then then I leave these bags. My second journey, I'm immediately on the dirt road. I kept looking.
Same dirt road?
Same dirt road. But I keep looking back at the bags. And now they're like 2 miles down the road, but I keep looking. And I hear this.
It takes time. It takes
time. Soul is
yeah.
telling me, why do you keep looking back? You've left them there. Like, go forward. And then I'm like, well, I didn't get to have a funeral. I didn't get to say goodbye. Very similar to my abuser got kicked out of the house. And I don't know if my grandparents knew what was going on because he lived there. And I don't know if anyone knew anything. I just know that he was one day gone. And in my first experience, I never got to say goodbye. And I was angry at him because he stole my first kiss. He stole everything from me. Very definitions of But now I'm on the dirt road and I'm like having a funeral. So the very next thing I know, I'm in a casket and my whole family is around, but they're happy. And then I go into the ground and it's lit on fire. And my voice inside says, all right, let the dead bury their dead. Time to move forward. So it was just kind of like, okay, like, I guess this is what we're doing now. So,
I think, first of all, very brave and vulnerable to share. And I really would like to acknowledge the importance and the validity of imagination in the healing of trauma. We were not taught that you can use your imagination and you can use imagery to actually change the way you think. And I think it kind of freaks people out who haven't used psychedelics, like to hear about these visual components. But using our imagination is it's a huge muscle that we aren't taught to use in trauma healing. And that muscle gets it's like your bicep really gets a workout when you're on a psychedelic journey dealing with trauma, just like what you experience. And it's interesting because some people, like you and me, I can tell, like, we're super visual during our journeys. There are other people that it's just like a blank black screen, and yet we both have beautiful integration. So I just want to caution everybody out there that some people are super visual, some people are like black screen. It's
actually such a great point, because I was talking to a couple of other people that I've worked with, and they're like, I got nothing. And
right.
And there's like this expectation. I'm like, you're not always going to. I'm like, well, kind of let's talk about like what is nothing. And then they will drop a bomb that is like, wait a minute, do you understand what you just said and how that is the linchpin to everything else?
Yes.
And they're like, wait a minute, what? I'm like, let's just go back and revisit this a second. And I'm like, that is huge. Like, and then like
you don't have to have the big visuals.
Yeah. It's like, and it's like you're saying, I mean, the integration is amazing because you get this like one thing, and it may not be dirt roads and hearts and baggage, but it doesn't change the fact.
I've had 2 black screen experiences, one with iboga and one with psilocybin.
Okay.
Both of which I felt like drilled into a bone deep trauma piece. Wow. That I didn't need visuals, because it was like, no, we're going to drill in, we're going to get to this piece, and we're just going to deal with this. But I've also had lovely iboga and psilocybin journeys that were full of visuals. So it's almost like, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, the medicine gives you what you need versus
I was just going to say, you get what you need, not what you want.
Yeah. So if anybody's out there and suddenly you get a blank screen, black or white or whatever color, it's just part of it.
It's part of it. So let's go back to MDMA for a second, because I'm still back on the scrambled eggs in the frying pan. It's been very controversial. Watching the news, like I actually got to spend some time down in DC this summer sharing my story with congressmen and senators and their staffers, with other veterans, which was really cool. But I feel like there's this there's still this how do I say it, stigma. In the West, we have like this, Michael Pollan called it white coat shamanism, and I love that term, because we don't want to completely accept the idea that there's something bigger in our soul or in our whatever for this awakening to happen.
Yeah.
Why do you think the stigma's there?
Oh, I just think it's so many years of propaganda, and there hasn't been anybody. So Michael Pollan at the MAPS conference made a big point of saying, right now at that point, which was not last June, but like the June before.
Yeah, correct. Yep.
The media was like, oh, wow, psychedelic promise. And he was like, get ready. It's good. It's a roller coaster with the media. You're going to get the up and you're going to get down. And we're definitely in the downward. You're seeing a lot of articles. Oh my gosh, the horrors of psychedelics. The man cuts off his penis after taking.
Oh my gosh, I saw that. I was like,
takes 5 paragraphs to get to the point where the man already had issues with depression and psychological issues, and was doing this with a high dose and by himself, like all the things that you shouldn't do. But the headline is magic mushrooms made me cut off my penis kind of thing, right? And so there's a reason why there's a stigma, because the clickbaitiness of those kind of stories, that's what flows to the surface.
Okay.
When I came, and that's my opinion, when I came out of my third journey, now I was an English teacher way back in the day. I always knew there was a book in me. I came out of that third journey and I had had a little bit of psilocybin with my MDMA, which like broke through that fifth grade, that 5-year-old fear.
I had ketamine in my MDMA.
Right. And I said to my doctors, there needs to be more voices like me, corporate girl, corporate guy. There needs to be more voices coming out and talking about this as the medical procedure it is, to start taking away this stigma of, I took some magic mushrooms and I wanted to crash a plane, or I wanted to, cut my penis off. Because there's very different applications. I'm not sitting here, saying, go do whatever you want to do. I'm talking about a medical procedure that can help millions of people. And it's going to take more conversations. I love that you were talking to Congress folks, that we need to keep sharing these stories and keep sharing the research. Yeah. When I tell people there are hundreds of research studies on, clinicaltrials.gov.
Yes.
They look at me like I got 3 eyeballs. I'm like, this is not just Jill talking about this. This is a multi-million-dollar enterprise. It's going to be in the billions in 5 years.
240 clinical trials around the world.
Boom. And the VA is moving forward, even with the FDA decision. They're moving forward.
So my mom actually volunteers at a VA center, and they have ketamine, which it's so cool.
Yeah,
that they're doing that, and I love that they're hopefully going to pick up the mantle where it kind of fell. And it is so interesting as you were saying that, because I'm thinking about the media and almost the investor side of all of this as well, because everyone was putting so much money into this Lycos Maps thing.
Yeah.
And then when
it costs a lot of money to do clinical trials.
And then when it didn't happen, you saw a lot of like super angry people who were against psychedelics.
Yes.
It wasn't just the media; it was like investors. Like it's almost like they saw a quick buck. It's going to come into this thing, and it's literally going to take years. And then I saw all of the arguments of why the FDA was bad or good. It was just kind of a really interesting thing to watch.
Yeah.
Trying to clinicalize something like this with Western culture, adding assisted therapy, it's completely different. I mean, this is like completely different from an FDA regulatory perspective.
They don't approve procedure. They approve drugs.
Correct.
And so there is a little bit of there was a lot that went wrong, but at the fundamental basis, the FDA doesn't approve therapy. They approve drugs. And
and
MDMA
American Psychological Association does therapy. So that's why it was kind of it was almost a surreal thing to watch. Because of the questions that were raised, it was like,
the advisory committee was a dumpster fire.
It was.
Yeah, you could tell how many people had zero knowledge of psychedelics from that, and also the propaganda being perpetuated by certain groups who actively spoke at that advisory meeting.
So now your first one was MDMA clinical trial.
No, my therapy was underground.
Oh, so yours was underground. Okay. So mine too. So, MDMA, like, what did you know beforehand? Like, what did you hear? Nothing. So, same. Like, now that I'm doing this and I'm in it, it's like, I had no idea how big it was in the 70s and 80s.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had kind of accidentally taken ecstasy at a party once. It was kind of like, hey, take this. And everybody else was, and I was like, all right. It wasn't until later I was like, oh, that's what ecstasy was. But no, I had really no idea. I was very much outside of the drug culture. I was K-12 for 20 years. I was squeaky clean.
Same. Like, so it's military, just say no. So, but I mean, now, like over the last couple of years, I've learned all of this. Like it was a
lots of research before it got shut down.
A lot of research and a lot of marriages, like actually were able to like really reconcile and come back together as a result of MDMA.
Yeah.
I've even met like some people who say that every year they do an MDMA divorce session, which I kind of laugh. It's kind of funny. where they bring all their baggage to the table, they divorce the baggage, and then they reconnect for the next year. And I'm like, that is so freaking cool. Like, yeah, like we do a divorce every year, not of us, but of our baggage that we bring to the table.
Oh, that's a lovely way of saying it.
Yeah. I mean, so same, like you described it as a warm blanket.
Yes.
What other things, how else would you describe it other than a warm blanket?
Well, so MDMA, and I think you'll agree with me, like some people argue that it shouldn't even be classified as a psychedelic because it doesn't give you the classic visuals, the hallucinations. It's an empathogen. It opens up your compassion. It floods your brain with your serotonin. It stops serotonin from the reuptake system. So you got a lot of serotonin, a lot of feel good, a lot of dopamine. In a clinical setting, that allows a trauma patient to relax her body and to feel more connected to the people with whom she's working. I'm using the pronoun she, being myself.
Yep.
And I was suddenly able to trust these people and share with them the most terrifying stuff. That my father tried to choke my mother at a parent conference meeting once. That came up in my first MDMA journey, that I was 100% sure that if my father was in the room, he would actively be trying to kill me. There's no way I would have ever, in a non-enhanced state, been able to have that conversation. Yeah. It would just be too scary and too like, are you kidding me? But that's what my subconscious, that's what that fifth grader who saw it, that's how that fifth grader felt. And so that's what MDMA does. You're still talking. You can certainly put an eye mask on whenever you want to kind of talk to the medicine. I'm like you, I'm super chatty. I talk to my doctors the whole time. I heard my inner voice, my intuition. You don't throw up. You sound totally sober. And we did the same thing. We voice recorded. We had a technical glitch on the second one, okay, but we voice recorded our sessions. And so when I listen back to the transcripts, it's fascinating what my subconscious actually says, but just as sober. The only difference was that I didn't have any lies. Whereas in like real life, if people would ask about my parents or my childhood, usually kind of little white lies, so they would not be asking me more questions. MDMA, I just either answered or I didn't answer. I noticed that as a distinction. But it's not like it doesn't incapacitate you. And when you realize that kids and ravers and clubbers are using MDMA or, versions of it every single weekend, and they're dancing and they're having a great time. There is this weird disconnect that, oh my gosh, MDMA is so dangerous. And yet every single college campus rave and nightclub has it every single weekend.
Yeah. And it's a loving environment.
Yeah. So it's very, it's hot chocolate on a cold day. It's a nice blanket. The person I just facilitated, her comment was, oh my gosh, all of the cobwebs have been cleared. I can see it now.
Wow. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So now what can I expect? Like I go up and you were kind of talking about the serotonin, like serotonin, dopamine, like it's amazing.
Yeah.
And then when you come down, like, is it a hard?
That's a great question. Yeah. There are roll kits out there. There's supplements you can take, and you also want to stay this is my opinion, this is not my opinion. The therapeutic dose that's used is never over 200 milligrams. And you can do the research online in terms of what your average dosage is and things of that sort. I'm not a doctor. I don't play one online. I've never gone over the 200 milligram number with me or anyone who has sat with me. And, if you also take supplements like the antioxidants and you're hydrated and you know that the day after is going to be kind of like a soup and lay around day, don't go running a marathon the day after your MDMA journey. You're going to be okay. But it's natural, since all that serotonin kind of got flooded, it takes a few days for your system to build it back. So it's very natural to not feel super great the couple of days after. So do your research on what's called a roll kit or the supplements to take. That's all freely available online, and you'll feel a lot better. And when you hear these horrific stories of people being down and out for a week, my guess, they took a huge dose. They didn't take care of themselves beforehand. They didn't hydrate. Maybe there's something else in their system. Maybe there's some other health issue.
I know my first one, the day after, and it's as you were talking about the serotonin, so much serotonin and dopamine. Like there's just so much love. It was it was crazy.
Yeah.
We actually we had an IV. Like they stuck an IV in us.
Yeah, just to get those antioxidants right back in you.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I began to ask that question, and that was why I was kind of asking, because when I was doing all of my my work, and I kept asking, like, what's the protocol? Do we have a protocol? Everyone's like, oh yeah, we have electrolytes or green tea or Pedialyte. I'm like, well, there's got to be something else other than that. So that's kind of how I created Neuma Hydrate. But just from all of that, but definitely, listeners, if this is something you want to consider doing, you got to know before you go, because we always say too, I always tell people, don't make any life-changing decisions that day or the next, or really even the next couple of days. Don't call anyone. So I know you want to like call whoever and stop. So we'd even say, like, for the next couple of weeks, just take it easy. Like, don't make any crazy life decisions.
Journal. I mean, you've got a great window, a couple weeks of neuroplasticity to work on your thought patterns and your behavior, and not the best time to make any sort of life-changing decision, because you might be making that life-changing decision from a different age in your life.
Foundation.
That 5-year-old really wanted a beach house. Might not be the best decision for that adult. That 5-year-old really wanted a pony. Not a best decision.
Buy a pony. Oh my gosh. So I've heard the term download.
Download?
I've heard people say, "Oh yeah, next week or so you're going to get downloads." Have you heard the words, like, or the expression downloads? Like what is that?
It's interesting. It's funny. I never really thought of them coming down. I've thought of them actually more coming up. That's really interesting. For me, when I'm working with my trauma and my triggers, for me, the memories that I need to work on, they kind of come up. And from there, I get the reframe or the thinking. But I can totally get how people would use the vernacular of, oh, I just got to download. You just got to reframe. You just thought about something differently. So I think it's totally just a shift in vocabulary.
That was perfect, because it really does. Like, if you're thinking about it, it really does. It comes up, and then you're always like, so what's a feeling? What's an emotion? I'm like really big on the what's a feeling and what's an emotion.
And where is it in your body?
Where is it coming from, and how does that make you feel?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today.
This was a delight.
Like this so fast. Do you have any advice for people who are contemplating, they're on the fence? I've heard, like, kind of in the beginning, I've talked to people who are like, there's no way.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Well, I think the first thing is, if you got an inkling about yourself or someone else in terms of a diagnosis, depression, PTSD, anxiety, end of life anxiety, addiction, and what you're doing is not working. Because if what you're doing is working, awesome. If what you're doing isn't working, go over to clinicaltrials.gov. Do an internet search, see what the research is talking about. Go take a look at some of the retreats where some of these substances are legal in other parts of the world, and see what they're doing, especially like if you've got an addiction issue with ibogaine, things of that sort. I would say start researching. And as you research, this is a medical procedure. Treat it like a medical procedure and ask all the questions that you would ask the same way that, you were going in and you were having, like, I don't know, heart disease or something. That's an awful thing to think about. I'm sorry. I meant high blood pressure. I meant something that wasn't deadly initially. I'm butchering that word. I'm not a doctor, everybody. I'm not a doctor. Fine. But my point being, do some research and keep an open mind. I often say, too, if people want to get involved in clinical trials, open up a Google alert or two, because a lot of times the private companies are just posting on their own websites. Yeah. And so it's kind of like word of mouth. So if you want to do it the legal way in the US and get into a clinical trial, set up a Google alert, oddly enough, get on LinkedIn. Psychedelic companies are really active on LinkedIn. You can get a lot of information there too. And it's really your choice. And if you are unsure about a facilitator or what you're doing, then don't do it. Do your research is really what it comes down to. I did my research and I had a trusted person. I had a trusted person who recommended it. And I had 2 people sitting with me who had impeccable credentials.
So
that's what made me feel safe.
That's such great advice. I was talking to a couple of weeks ago that are talking about going to a retreat.
Yeah.
And I just asked them a couple of questions like, so what is the medicine? Well, we don't know. I'm like, how do you not know? Like, what's the preparation and what's the integration? And for those that don't know, I mean, preparation, like we were talking about, what's the setting? What are the intentions of why you're going? There's a process that we typically use. But then the integration is really, how do we take all these lessons you've learned?
What happens when you get home?
How do we implement them into our daily lives? They get 2 phone calls and that's it.
Right.
And I was like, wait a minute.
So, if you're going to spend that kind of money to go on a retreat and you're coming back and don't have therapeutic support, you're kind of wasting a little bit of money, to be honest with you.
100%. So no, and I agree, ask all of the right questions.
Ask them. And you don't have to think of them on your own. You can do an internet search. What are the questions I should ask about?
Yeah. So this time went by so fast. I know you have a hard stop, but
I do. I'm
thank
sorry.
You so much for your time today, and look forward to more.
We'll connect again. This was good.
100%.